I'm Jim Peck. Welcome to MSU Today in studio. We're talking about climate change. My guest, MSU professor and Nobel Prize winner David Skole. Now, David, you've told me that climate change is the greatest threat to the peace and prosperity of the world. That is a sweeping statement.
I actually say there are two things that are of paramount importance: climate change and poverty. I don't necessarily put climate change on the top of that list, but those two things really do, I think, threaten peace and prosperity because of the large potential economic impact of climate change on agriculture, on water resources, and all those kinds of things. And I think that that warrants that kind of exclamation, I guess you would say. I think that they really are important. Sure.
People, we had the chance to travel with you for MSU Today in Laos and Thailand a little bit, and I got back and people said, that climate change stuff, that's not real. There's really no, look how hot it is outside. Look how cold it is now.
Right. Unfortunately, I don't think there's been a very good airing by the press or whoever on the science behind climate change. And in fact, you would expect to see a more energized hydrologic cycle, meaning more heating in the hydrologic cycle would lead towards more precipitation, and in the cold months of winter, that is snow. So I think I can't give an explanation for why there seems to be growing resistance to the concept of climate change. I think it's been thrown into the political dialogue in a very haphazard and irresponsible way, and I think the people around the country pick that up. They hear some of these things being said, and they don't have an ability to really know the science very well, and that's to be understood, and yet nobody's really explaining the science behind climate change. Add on top of that the so-called ClimateGate controversy that came out, which was also much overblown, tends to, I think, make most people become skeptical about it. But, you know, we've been researching this subject for 20, 25 years, and there's a lot of good science behind this, and climate change is a real threat.
Does it make you crazy when people say that to you? It's like,
it makes me absolutely crazy when we get into that kind of discussion. Absolutely crazy, because it's unfortunately a situation where the work that's done in universities by scientists is devalued, and I just don't think that's right, and I get very, very upset when some folks tend to say the scientists are doing it to feather their own nest, or out of some self-interest for money,
or it's politicized, that this isn't real. They're doing it because these people are the Democrats are in power, so there's climate change. Right,
and it's just a hoax, and that's the worst I've heard, when they call it a hoax. And it's not a very intelligent national discussion on the topic right now. It's unfortunate.
We'll be back after this. If what the scientists are saying is true, I think some people have the feeling like, okay, this may be true, but there's nothing I can do to fix this. Is that a proper perspective?
I actually am one that is a strong believer in having the larger institutions like government, or large corporations, or big universities like Michigan State really take the lead, because that's where you can leverage big changes. I think it's also important that you could incorporate some things into your daily lifestyle, if you will, carpooling or whatever. But
those are going to be small. Those are incremental things. I mean, if I turn off the lights, that's great. I feel better. It does save a little bit. I save a little on my heating and my electric bill. But when a university like Michigan State decides to make big changes, does that take the kind of steps you're talking about?
That's exactly right. And I think that's the kind of thing that has to be done. A big university, we have 600,000 tons of carbon dioxide emitted from our power plant every year. Now, to put that into perspective, that's more CO2 than 25 developing countries. Like Sierra Leone, a country in Africa, the whole country has fewer emissions of carbon dioxide than our power plant. So what can we do? We need to work at that level, at the whole organization, the whole university, to see if we can substitute some of the coal with biomass, maybe use more natural gas, put in campus-wide conservation efforts, not just one thing here or there. And I think it's a tribute to the university's administration that we are doing that. The university joined the Chicago Climate Exchange about 3 years ago. Has an active program called Environmental Stewardship that is focusing on reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, doing all kinds of studies of buildings and our energy consumption patterns and all kinds of things like that, including looking for alternative fuel sources, renewable fuel sources. And when you're dealing with a massive power plant, a big university, which is a small city really, we produce our own water, we produce our own food, there's at any one time tens of thousands of us here in these buildings, 500 or more than 500 buildings. When you start addressing something at that scale, you can make a big difference, absolutely. And I think that's why the government's important to play a role. And I think that's why federal or national policy is important. And I get very irate when folks really treat the issue of cap and trade legislation as if it's a
What does that mean for people that don't get, when they hear cap and trade, what does that mean?
Cap and trade is a market-based solution or policy approach to reducing air pollution. And the way it works is that rather than having every emitter reduce their emissions by a set amount, it allows for some emitters to reduce by a set amount, some to reduce even more if they can get their technology or get their program in place, and others not to reduce until at a later date. And then they trade the excess allowances and even purchase offsets. And offsets are projects like agriculture or forestry projects that take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And that allows the different companies or the different emitters to manage their business cycle according to their own business plan. If they want to recapitalize to newer, better, more efficient technology later, they can do that. And they can purchase excess allowances from those who are already way below their cap. And it's funny because most people think of this as a form of taxes, and it could be looked at as a new administration, Democrat administration idea, but we've been doing cap and trade for sulfur, SOx and NOx under the Clean Air Act for 20 years, since 1990. And in fact, cap and trade was an idea that was concocted by the Reagan administration. It's a market-oriented approach, and it has proven to work for other air pollutants like sulfur and nitrogen oxides. So it seems to be the sound approach. And my view on this is, you first ask yourself, is climate change serious? If it is serious, should we do something about it? And if the answer to that is yes, then cap and trade is the most cost-effective, market-oriented way to do that. So if you're against cap and trade, you got to back up and ask yourself, do you not want to do anything at all about climate change? And if your answer is, no, I don't want to do anything about climate change, all right, it's not a problem, well, then let's have that discussion. But if you come to agreement that we want to do something about climate change through national policy, cap and trade is really the most cost-effective way to do that.
We'll be back after this. We're seeing going into the second year of an administration that everybody had high hopes for, and now people are saying, we haven't seen as much as we'd like to. It's getting bogged down with health care. Where is this issue for you?
Well, I think there has been some progress. I know that I've spoken to most members of our congressional delegation from Michigan, and some get it and some don't. I think that when they don't get it, it's because they haven't really had a very fair hearing on what the scientific issues are, and what the evidence shows, and we need to do more to communicate and educate these kinds of things so that our legislators can make a sound decision. It's a little befuddling to many of us that 2 years ago cap and trade was on the table. It was in both McCain's platform and in Obama's platform. It didn't even seem to be a discriminator between the two. Their plans were almost the same, Republican and Democrat. And now it's a contentious issue. And that, I think, is just pure politics. And we need to move the whole discussion away from politics and put it into a solution-seeking exercise, a problem-solving exercise, bringing scientists to the table, policymakers to the table, citizens to the table, and figure out how we're going to fix this problem. Yankee ingenuity. And what a lot of us are talking about is the opportunities for the economy in green technologies, clean technologies, all these kinds of things. Our university has a strong focus on the emerging bioeconomy, and I think that emerging bioeconomy is an opportunity space for Midwestern states that have lots of land to grow alternative fuels or feedstocks for materials, fabrics, biodegradable de-icers at the airport. There's a whole slew of goods and services that can be developed under a green technology.
Well, and you've talked about the fact that there's more about money that's green than just the color, that there is money to be made there. But are people making the connection? It seems like when the dollars start getting attached to it, when it starts getting profitable, or even sometimes when it starts to get cool, no pun intended, it starts to get momentum, it starts to get more attraction. What's going to kick it off?
Well, I'll answer it in this way, in a related way. Before the financial crisis, what did our economy look like? When it was growing, well, what else was going on? Gasoline was over $4 a gallon. Commodity prices like corn and soybeans were at record high prices. Economies in Asia and India and China were growing like gangbusters. What you saw then was a real concern about climate change and the rising cost of fuel and how unsustainable it was to continue to use fossil fuels and perhaps move to renewable fuels. And then what sprung up 3 years ago was a whole lot of investment money going into clean technologies and other new forms of energy besides fossil energy. And that was in tandem with positive thinking on solving the climate crisis. And so I think that we will get back there, and you will see commodity prices rise again. You will see fuel and energy prices rise again. And I think that at that time, if you start seeing investment opportunities, money is available, and you can see investment opportunities in alternative bioenergy and biomaterials, I think we might get back to that discussion that we were having, 3 years ago, 2 years ago.
And we'll be right back. I remember standing with you in a little village in Thailand, and we looked at the people around us that were living very basic existences there. And you were there working with things with jatropha trees and sort of mapping carbon offsets and those sorts of things. And you said it was important to be there because these people, as basically as they're living, are really on the front lines and the first people that would feel any change in climate.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's the rural folks that are not able to save, don't have extra capital available, are living from year to year, we'll see the first impacts of climate change, whether it's through changes in rainfall or temperature or what have you, and also the first impacts of rising fuel prices, because they actually will pay the same price for gasoline, if not more, than we do here in this country. And so those two effects, climate change and reliance on fossil fuels, are potential threats to the poorest of the poor. I mean, places where we visited, those folks were making less than $1,000 a year. Okay, most parts of the poorest parts of Africa are living on less than $400 a year. These folks in extreme poverty that are living off the land have the most to lose from climate change and changing rising fuel prices. The Jatropha example that you mentioned is where we're trying to find ways that local farmers in rural areas in Thailand and Laos, where you visited, can produce their own fuel. And they do that by growing it in a tree, a Jatropha tree, and squeezing the oil out of the nuts, and then a simple process of turning the vegetable oil into biodiesel, a B100 biodiesel. And they can produce enough to run their own vehicles. And it can be locally produced. It doesn't have to be a large centralized processing system. They have the land, and they have excess labor. So this kind of model is land is capital, oil's not capital. Land is, because you can produce everything from biological materials that you would produce today from fossil fuels.
Well, it was interesting when we were there because the approach isn't just, you going into a little village and saying, grow this tree. Right. It's working with universities, it's working with the government. They have sort of their own extension network. The way I started thinking about it, yeah. Like we're used to here. But it seems like it has to take an effort like that. It's grassroots, but it's not just grassroots. Right.
No, it's at many different levels of institutions and organizations in the country. And for instance, in Thailand, we have a very close working relationship with the National Research Council of Thailand, with several universities in Thailand, and then with some research stations out in the countryside from those universities, and then community organizations, farmer organizations, and then individual landowners even, that are actually the ones planting the trees. And you have to do all that because at one level, the highest level, the government of Thailand has an international agreement on climate change, just like most countries in the world do. And it is part of their national policy on climate change mitigation through growing trees for carbon offsets. So they're interested. And then the universities are where the expertise lies. Their land-grant university, just like our land-grant university, they don't call it that, has the scientists and the expertise. And then you have to work with the farmers themselves because they're the ones that own those offsets. They're the ones that are on the front lines of capturing CO2 out of the atmosphere. They're the ones that are doing the service, and they're the ones that should get paid for it. And to ensure that that whole thing, all that works together, you've got to involve a lot of people, a lot of organizations. Interestingly, one of our strongest collaborators at a university in Thailand is from Mahasarakham University, and they affectionately refer to them as MSU Thailand, because that's their initials as well.
And we saw that when we were there. I actually have a shirt that I've been wearing around, and people say, those aren't the MSU colors. I said, well, no, it's a whole
right,
different
that's
MSU.
Right.
But they're also having some of the same things that we've seen here in this country, where everybody, the younger people are leaving the countryside, the farms aren't as productive because they're having to go to Bangkok and other cities where they can make a living. And
right.
and part of your work is showing that you still can make a living from these areas. It's not just subsistence farming.
Right. Right, that's been a long-term trend, depopulating the rural areas and young people moving to the cities. But at least in a couple of examples where we're working, the one most notable one is this InPang network, which is a community network of about 4,000 households. Their focus is to make agriculture diverse and productive, and important to their children, and many of their children are staying on. So instead of getting into mountains of debt with subsidies to grow annual rice production, they're growing trees that produce berries, biofuels, wine, juice, mushrooms, just fabrics, dyes for fabrics, a whole range of high value-added products that bring substantial income and some economic freedom for the families. And I think that keeps generations, productive on the farm.
In looking at the issues related to climate change and the bioeconomy, is this something that you think politicians, people in our country, are missing out on when they start looking at all the economic problems?
Yeah, it's unfortunate that the focus seems to be on jobs, but not really the economy, or something narrow like that, in a very traditional kind of mindset, when in fact we're sitting on a change in the way our economy runs that's going to be really profound and has profound opportunities. What I worry about is that while we're bickering here, the Chinese or the Indians or the Europeans have figured it out. And they're going to be producing all the renewable technologies or all the bio technologies, and not us. And that would be a shame.
So all this isn't just related to the weather?
No, it's not the weather. It's the climate.
Well, and how do you tell people the difference between climate and weather?
Weather is what happens on a day-to-day basis. And the climate is the system that you live in for the long term. So you can have a tropical climate, and you can have an arid desert environment or a polar environment. Those are all climate designations. But whether it rains today or snows today is weather.
And so we have climate, and we have economic climate.
Yep, and what we need is a climate for change on climate change.
That could be a bumper sticker.
Yeah, maybe.
Cool.
That's what's needed, I guess. Bumper stickers help, it seems to be. Yeah,
bumper sticker.
Definitely.
Well, Professor David Skole, we are just about out of time. I appreciate you being here today. And for more information, you can always go to our website, which is at msutoday.msu.edu. Thank you for watching MSU Today in Studio. I'm Jim Peck, and I'll see you right here next time. Take care.